Do you remember the last time you tried to get up from a chair and your body simply didn't respond as you expected? That feeling of helplessness and frustration while your loved ones watched you with concern in their eyes. For Alejandro Montero, this reality became constant when at 68 years old, he fell in front of everyone during his only granddaughter's wedding. What seemed like a simple stumble would become the beginning of a silent battle against an enemy that had been stealing his strength for years without him knowing it. Sarcopenia had been slowly consuming his body, taking with it not only his independence, but also his dignity and self-esteem. But what the doctor told him after that incident would change his life forever, offering him a path he never imagined possible. This is the story of how Alejandro recovered not only his physical strength, but also his self-confidence, and how you too can achieve this, even when it seems all is lost. Alejandro had always been a solid man, as his wife Lucia used to say. A tireless worker, he had built with his own hands the house where they raised their two children, Manuel and Elena. For more than 40 years, he had worked as a carpenter, and his calloused hands were witness to a life dedicated to hard work. He was always the first to offer help moving furniture, carrying groceries, or playing soccer with his grandchildren in the garden. His strength wasn't just physical. Alejandro was the emotional pillar of his family, the man everyone turned to when they needed advice or comfort. But in the last 2 years, something had changed. At first, they were small things he attributed to the normal fatigue of age. It took him a little longer to get up in the mornings. He felt he needed to rest after activities he used to do effortlessly, and he had started avoiding carrying his youngest granddaughter, Sophia, claiming back pain. Lucia, always attentive, had noticed these changes with silent concern, but every time she tried to talk about it, Alejandro dismissed it with a simple, "It's just age, woman." The reality was that Alejandro had begun living in a state of constant adaptation. Without realizing it, he had modified his daily routine to avoid situations that would reveal his growing weakness. He no longer went up to the second floor of the house unless absolutely necessary. He had abandoned his passion for gardening because kneeling and getting up had become an odyssey. He had even stopped attending weekly meetings with his former co-workers because the journey to the neighborhood cafe, which he used to walk, now exhausted him. If you identified with this story, know that you are not alone on this path. Thousands of people like you discover daily that muscle weakness doesn't have to define your future. Here on the Vida Plena channel, we share not only real stories, but also proven paths that have helped countless people recover their strength and independence. Subscribe to receive our content for free that combines the most up-to-date scientific knowledge with the sensitivity of those who understand what you're experiencing. Together, we can transform this story and write a new chapter in your life. The day of his granddaughter Carmen's wedding was the turning point that Alejandro could no longer ignore. It was a radiant spring day, and the entire family was overflowing with joy. Carmen, Manuel's firstborn, had always had a special relationship with her grandfather. When she was little, she spent hours in the carpentry workshop, watching fascinated as Alejandro's expert hands transformed simple wooden planks into beautiful furniture. It was he who taught her that patience and perseverance were the most valuable tools in life, more than any saw or hammer. The ceremony had been emotional, and during the reception, the moment came for the dance between the bride and her grandfather, a tradition that Carmen had insisted on maintaining. The orchestra began to play a soft melody, and all the guests formed a circle around them. Alejandro, dressed in his best suit, took his granddaughter's hand with a mixture of pride and nervousness. In his mind, he went over each step, worried about his balance, which lately seemed to betray him. During the first few bars, everything was going well. Carmen smiled radiantly while Alejandro guided her across the dance floor, both wrapped in a bubble of shared happiness. But then, when attempting a small turn, he felt his legs not responding as they should. He tried to stay upright, to pretend everything was fine, but it was as if his muscles had turned to jelly. Before he knew it, he was on the ground, in front of all the guests, with an expression of confusion and shame that would break anyone's heart. The silence that followed was overwhelming. For a moment, no one moved, as if everyone was processing what they had just witnessed. Then, within seconds, Manuel and two waiters ran to help him up. Carmen, with tears in her eyes, knelt beside him, holding his hand and assuring him that everything was okay. But Alejandro knew nothing was okay. In that moment, while feeling the pitying and concerned looks of everyone present, something broke inside him. It wasn't just his body that had failed. It was his image of himself, his identity as the strong and reliable man he had always been. The rest of the wedding passed like a fog for Alejandro. He sat at a distant table, politely declining invitations to join the festivities. He watched from afar as his family enjoyed themselves, trying not to ruin his granddaughter's special day any further. But the joy he should have felt had been replaced by a feeling of emptiness and defeat he had never experienced before. That night, back home, he couldn't hold back the tears while Lucia helped him undress. "I'm no longer the man I used to be," he confessed with a broken voice. "I'm becoming a burden to everyone." Lucia, with the wisdom that only shared years can give, hugged him tightly and said, "Tomorrow we're going to the doctor. No more excuses, Alejandro. Whatever it is, we'll face it together, as we always have. I need to ask you, and I want you to be honest with yourself. When was the last time you could openly talk about how the loss of muscle strength has affected your daily life? Perhaps you, like Alejandro, have kept this to yourself, thinking no one would really understand. I understand that silence, but I want you to know this is a space where your voice matters. If you feel comfortable, share in the comments by simply writing, 'I also feel this when,' and complete with your experience. Your comment might be exactly what someone needed to read today to not feel alone on this path. Sometimes the first step to recovering our strength is simply acknowledging where we are now. The waiting room at Dr. Ramirez's office was full when Alejandro and Lucia arrived for their appointment. They had chosen this doctor based on Elena's recommendation, who assured them he specialized in age-related health problems and had a comprehensive approach that went beyond simply prescribing medications. Alejandro felt uncomfortable, surrounded by elderly people who seemed to accept their limitations with a resignation he wasn't willing to adopt. After a long wait, it was finally his turn. Dr. Ramirez turned out to be much younger than Alejandro expected, perhaps in his 40s, but he had a reassuring presence and an attentive gaze that immediately conveyed confidence. He asked them to sit down and began asking detailed questions about his lifestyle, his diet, his daily routine, and the changes he had noticed in recent years. Alejandro, initially reluctant, found himself sharing more than he had planned, encouraged by the doctor's non-judgmental attitude. "What you're describing to me, Don Alejandro, are clear symptoms of sarcopenia," Dr. Ramirez finally said. "It's a condition characterized by the progressive loss of muscle mass and strength, primarily related to age." Seeing the expression of concern on the couple's face, he quickly added, "It's not a terminal illness or anything you should be excessively alarmed about. In fact, it's a natural process of aging, but one that can be accelerated due to factors like physical inactivity, inadequate nutrition, or certain underlying medical conditions." Alejandro felt a mixture of relief and bewilderment. On one hand, knowing that what he was experiencing had a name and an explanation gave him some comfort. On the other hand, the idea that his body was deteriorating as part of a natural process was difficult to accept. "And there's nothing that can be done?" he asked, with a hint of despair in his voice. Dr. Ramirez smiled, and that smile would change Alejandro's life forever. "On the contrary, Don Alejandro, there's a lot we can do. Sarcopenia is not a sentence of perpetual weakness. With the right approach, which includes specific exercise, appropriate nutrition, and some lifestyle changes, you can not only stop its progression, but even reverse part of the damage already caused. Science has advanced a lot in this field, and today we know it's never too late to start strengthening our muscles, regardless of age. As the doctor spoke, something began to change inside Alejandro. The feeling of defeat he had experienced after falling at the wedding was starting to be replaced by a spark of hope. "Are you telling me I can become who I was before?" he asked, leaning forward in his chair. "I'm telling you, Dr. Ramirez responded firmly, that you can become a stronger and healthier version of who you are now. It's not about going back to the past, but about building a future where your body serves you in the best possible way for this stage of your life." The comprehensive recovery plan. The plan Dr. Ramirez outlined was comprehensive and specifically designed for Alejandro's situation. The first component was a progressive resistance exercise program adapted to his current level of strength and mobility. "We'll start with the basics," the doctor had explained. "Simple exercises you can do at home, initially using only your body weight. And then, as you gain confidence and strength, we'll incorporate resistance bands and light weights." The second component was a complete review of his diet. The doctor had been emphatic. Protein is fundamental for building and maintaining muscle tissue, and many older adults don't consume enough. He had recommended consulting with a specialized nutritionist, whose name he had provided, to develop a meal plan that would increase his intake of high-quality proteins and other nutrients essential for muscle health. Finally, the doctor had emphasized the importance of adequate rest and stress management. "Muscle doesn't grow while you're exercising it," he had explained. "It grows during the recovery period afterward. Without adequate rest, all your efforts will be in vain." He had also talked about how chronic stress could negatively affect not only mental health, but also the ability to maintain and develop muscle mass. Armed with this knowledge and renewed determination, Alejandro and Lucia embarked on what would be a transformative journey. The first week was the hardest. Accustomed to avoiding any activity that might reveal his weakness, Alejandro now had to face his limitations directly. The initial exercises, though simple, were challenging. Squats using a chair for support, calf raises holding onto the back of a chair, and wall push-ups that would have seemed trivial to his younger self now left him breathing with difficulty. "I can't do this, Lucia," he confessed one afternoon after a particularly frustrating attempt to complete a set of exercises. "It's humiliating to see what I've become." Lucia, who had taken on the role of personal trainer with an enthusiasm that surprised them both, sat beside him and took his hands in hers. "Do you remember when you taught Carmen to work with wood? How many times did she tell you she couldn't do it? And what did you tell her?" Alejandro smiled at the memory. "I told her no one is born knowing, that every master was first an apprentice, and that patience is the mother of all skills." "Exactly," Lucia responded gently. "Now you're the apprentice, Alejandro. You're learning to inhabit this new body, to understand it and strengthen it. Humility isn't in recognizing your limitations, but in having the courage to work to overcome them. Gradual progress and small victories." Those words marked a turning point. From that moment on, Alejandro approached his exercise routine not as a series of reminders of his weakness, but as opportunities to grow stronger. Day by day, with patience and perseverance, he began to notice small changes. At first, they were almost imperceptible. He could do one more repetition than the day before, he felt less exhausted after his routine, or he noticed it took less time to catch his breath. Parallel to this, the nutritionist had designed a meal plan that revolutionized how Alejandro and Lucia ate. They incorporated more lean proteins like chicken, fish, legumes, and low-fat dairy products. They learned about the importance of distributing protein intake throughout the day rather than concentrating it in a single meal. They discovered foods rich in antioxidants and anti-inflammatory compounds that could help combat oxidative stress, a contributing factor to sarcopenia, The kitchen, which had always been Lucia's domain, became a space of shared experimentation. Together, they explored new recipes, tried ingredients they had never considered before, and turned nutritional necessity into a culinary adventure. "Who would have thought," Alejandro joked while preparing a protein smoothie with fruits and spinach, "that at my age I'd become a nutrition guru?" As the weeks passed, the changes became more evident. Alejandro noticed it was easier to get out of bed in the mornings. He could climb stairs without having to stop halfway to catch his breath. One day, almost without thinking, he lifted Sophia, his youngest granddaughter, when she ran to greet him, and was surprised to discover he could hold her effortlessly. The little girl's smile when he spun her in the air was the best reward he could have asked for. If this story has resonated with you, if you've found in Alejandro's words a reflection of your own experiences, I invite you to share this story. With a simple click on like and sharing this video, you can be the bridge that connects someone else with the hope they so desperately need. The community we're forming here is not just a space for information, but for mutual support and understanding. Every shared story is an extended hand to those who still walk alone, silently fighting against sarcopenia. Remember that your experience, however personal it may be, can be the light that guides others on their own path to recovery. Medical validation and new challenges. 3 months after his first consultation, Alejandro returned to see Dr. Ramirez for a follow-up evaluation. The doctor performed several tests to measure his strength, balance, and body composition. The results were surprising even to the optimistic doctor. "Don Alejandro," he said with a satisfied smile, "your results are exceptional. You've increased your muscle mass by a percentage I rarely see in patients your age, especially in such a short period. Your grip strength, which is an important indicator of overall muscle health, has improved significantly, and your balance, which was one of our main concerns after your fall, shows notable improvement." Alejandro couldn't help but have his eyes moisten. They weren't just numbers and percentages on a results sheet. It was tangible validation of all the efforts, frustrations, and small triumphs of the past months. It was confirmation that the path he had chosen, though difficult, was the right one. "But let's not stop here," continued Dr. Ramirez. "These results are extraordinary, but they're just the beginning. How about we adjust your program to continue challenging your muscles? The human body is incredibly adaptive. If we want to continue seeing improvements, we need to keep presenting it with new challenges." Finding community and purpose. Alejandro nodded enthusiastically. The idea of increasing the intensity of his training, which 3 months ago would have seemed intimidating, now felt stimulating. He left the consultation with an updated program and renewed motivation. It was then that he decided to take a step he never would have imagined. He enrolled in a local gym that offered special classes for older adults. At first, the idea of exercising in public, where others could see his efforts and possible difficulties, generated anxiety. But he quickly discovered he wasn't alone in his situation. The group was made up of people of various ages and fitness levels, all working to improve their health and quality of life. Rita, the instructor, a woman of about 60 with the energy of someone half her age, became an inexhaustible source of inspiration. "Age is just a number," she used to say, while guiding them through increasingly challenging exercises. "What matters is how you feel and what you can do with your body, not how many years your ID says." At the gym, Alejandro not only found a space to continue strengthening his body, but also a support community. He met Carlos, a 75-year-old former marathon runner who had overcome a heart attack and now helped others recover their health. Maria, a 70-year-old retired teacher who had started training after being diagnosed with osteoporosis and now had stronger bones than many younger women. Jorge, an 80-year-old widower who had found in exercise a way to combat loneliness and depression after losing his wife. These people, with their stories of struggle and overcoming, became more than exercise companions. They became friends, confidants, and mentors. With them, Alejandro learned that vulnerability wasn't a weakness, but a form of human connection. Sharing their difficulties, celebrating their small triumphs, and supporting each other on difficult days created bonds that enriched his life in ways he never would have anticipated. Becoming a voice of hope. One day, after a particularly challenging class, Rita approached him with an unexpected proposal. "Alejandro, I've been observing your progress, and it's truly inspiring. We're organizing an event for International Day of Older Persons, and I was wondering if you'd be willing to share your story. I think it could motivate many people who are going through similar situations." The idea of speaking publicly about his experience with sarcopenia, of exposing his vulnerabilities to strangers, initially filled him with apprehension. But then he thought about how he would have felt 6 months ago if he had heard someone like him now, someone who had faced the same challenges and had found a path to recovery. He thought about how much it would have helped him to know he wasn't alone, that there was hope beyond resignation. "I'll do it," he said finally. "If my story can help someone else take the first step, then it's worth sharing." Preparing his testimony was an emotional process. Alejandro had to relive the moments of frustration, fear, and shame he had experienced. He had to honestly examine how the loss of strength had affected not only his body, but also his self-esteem, his relationships, and his vision of himself. But he also had the opportunity to reflect on everything he had learned and achieved, on the inner strength he had discovered he possessed, and on the wonderful people who had appeared in his life thanks to this challenging experience. The day of the event, the local community center was full. Alejandro, sitting in the front row next to Lucia, felt butterflies in his stomach while waiting for his turn to speak. When he finally took the stage, he looked at the audience and saw faces that reflected his own experiences: concern, hope, determination, curiosity, and he knew exactly what to say. "6 months ago," he began, "I fell in front of everyone during the dance with my granddaughter at her wedding. It was the most humiliating moment of my life, but it was also the moment that changed everything. That day, I decided I wouldn't accept weakness as my inevitable destiny." As Alejandro shared his story from the sarcopenia diagnosis to his recovery journey, he noticed how his words resonated with the audience. He saw nods of recognition, silent tears, smiles of hope. He spoke about the physical and emotional challenges, about the importance of family support, about the days when he wanted to give up, and how he found the strength to continue. "What I've learned," he concluded, "is that it's never too late to reclaim your strength. It's never too late to decide that your story hasn't ended, that there are more chapters to write. Sarcopenia may be part of my reality, but it doesn't define who I am or what I can achieve. And the same is true for each of you." A new chapter of purpose. When he finished his speech, the room erupted in applause. People he had never met approached to thank him, to share their own experiences, to ask for advice. An elderly woman with tears in her eyes told him that his testimony had given her the courage to seek help after years of resigning herself to her weakness. A man his age confided that he had been considering suicide because he felt like a burden to his family, but now saw there was another option. That day, Alejandro understood that his fight against sarcopenia wasn't just for him. He had become a beacon of hope for others, a living testimony that age and physical limitations don't have to dictate the terms of our existence. And that purpose, that impact on the lives of others, gave him a sense of fulfillment he had never experienced before. 1 year after his fall at the wedding, Alejandro celebrated his 69th birthday in a way that would have seemed impossible months earlier, participating in a 5-kilometer charity walk along with his new friends from the gym. The walk, organized to raise funds for research on age-related diseases, had become a symbolic goal in his recovery journey. Lucia, Manuel, Elena, and his grandchildren, including Carmen, were there to support him, wearing shirts they had specially designed for the occasion with the phrase, "Team Alejandro, strength has no age." Seeing them cheering him on from the finish line as he crossed, tired but triumphant, was one of the most emotional moments of his life. "Who would have thought," he commented to Carlos while they caught their breath after completing the course. "A year ago I could barely climb the stairs without feeling like I would faint, and now we're here, having walked 5 kilometers under the sun." Carlos smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. "That's the beauty of our bodies, my friend. They respond to what we ask of them. If we ask them to strengthen, they do. If we allow them to weaken, they do that too. The choice is always ours." Continuing evolution and community impact. Alejandro's journey continued evolving in the following months. His exercise program became more sophisticated as his strength and endurance increased. Under Rita's guidance and with the support of his gym friends, he began incorporating more challenging workouts, exercises with heavier weights, yoga sessions to improve his flexibility, and even swimming, an activity he hadn't practiced since his youth. But perhaps the most significant development was when Dr. Ramirez proposed he be part of a support group for people newly diagnosed with sarcopenia. "They need to hear from someone who has walked this path," the doctor explained. "Someone who understands their fears and frustrations, but who can also show them there's hope, that recovery is possible." Alejandro accepted without hesitation. He vividly remembered the confusion and discouragement he had felt when he received his diagnosis, and how he would have valued talking to someone who had gone through the same experience. If he could be that person for others, it would be a way to give meaning to everything he had lived through. The group met weekly at the community center. It was made up of men and women of various ages, from their 60s to well into their 80s, all dealing with different stages of sarcopenia. Some, like Alejandro in his early days, were just beginning to recognize the symptoms. Others had been struggling with the condition for years, but without a structured plan or adequate support. "The first thing I want you to understand," Alejandro told them in his first session as group facilitator, "is that this isn't the end of your independence or quality of life. It's a challenge, yes, but one that can be overcome with knowledge, support, and determination." He shared his story without reservations, including the moments of despair and frustration. He spoke about the importance of having a support team, whether family, friends, or healthcare professionals. He explained the basic principles of strength training and proper nutrition in simple, accessible terms. But above all, he offered them something many had lost: hope. "Sarcopenia doesn't define who we are," he often told them. "It's just a condition we live with, and while we can't ignore it, we don't have to let it limit us more than necessary." As the weeks passed, Alejandro witnessed remarkable transformations in the group members. Ramon, a 75-year-old former taxi driver who had arrived leaning heavily on a cane, could now walk short distances without help. Dolores, a 68-year-old grandmother who had been so weak she couldn't lift her grandchildren, now played actively with them in the park. Pedro, an 82-year-old widower who had fallen into deep depression after his wife's death, found new purpose in his exercise routine and in helping others in the group. "It's like you've turned on a light in a dark room," Dr. C. Ramirez told him after observing one of the sessions. "You've shown them a path when many thought they were in a dead end." This new facet as mentor and motivator gave Alejandro a sense of purpose he had never anticipated. Throughout his life, he had found satisfaction in his work as a carpenter, in providing for his family, in being a pillar of support for his loved ones. But now, in this advanced stage of his life, he discovered a new way to contribute, to leave his mark on the world. National recognition and expanded impact. 2 years after his initial diagnosis, Alejandro was invited to speak at a national congress on healthy aging. It was recognition of his tireless work in the community, his practical and compassionate approach to sarcopenia, and the tangible results he had helped achieve in dozens of people. Standing before an audience of healthcare professionals, researchers, and active older adults, Alejandro shared his story once more. But this time, He narrated it not as a personal testimony, but as a case study of what's possible when scientific knowledge is combined with emotional support and personal determination. Sarcopenia is a real condition with well-documented biological bases, he explained. But our response to it shouldn't be purely medical. It should be holistic, considering not only the physical aspects but also the emotional, social, and spiritual aspects of aging. He spoke about the importance of challenging negative stereotypes about aging, creating communities that support physical well-being at any age, and empowering older adults to take an active role in their health. And finally, he made a call to action directed at both professionals and older adults present. We need to change the narrative about aging, he concluded passionately. Instead of seeing it as a period of inevitable decline, we can reframe it as a stage of adaptation, growth, and continued purpose. And the way we approach sarcopenia and other age-related conditions is a crucial starting point for this change in perspective. The impact of his presentation was immediate and profound. Healthcare professionals approached to ask about his peer support methodology. Researchers wanted to know more about the factors that had contributed to his successful recovery. Community organizations invited him to help establish similar programs in other cities. But perhaps the most significant moment occurred when a young doctor approached him with tears in her eyes. "My father was diagnosed with severe sarcopenia 3 months ago," she confided. "He's been so depressed, so convinced that his active life is over, that he's rejected any kind of intervention. Today I convinced him to come listen to you, and he's there, in the back row. He hasn't said a word, but I saw something in his eyes while you spoke. I saw hope, and that's something I hadn't seen in a long time. Reflection and continued purpose." In this story of Alejandro, we see that sarcopenia, while a real medical condition, need not be a sentence of inevitable decline. With proper medical guidance, appropriate exercise, good nutrition, and most importantly, the right mindset and community support, significant improvements are not only possible, but probable. The key takeaways from Alejandro's journey include: early intervention matters. The sooner sarcopenia is addressed, the better the outcomes. Comprehensive approach works, combining exercise, nutrition, medical care, and emotional support. Community support is crucial. Having others who understand the journey makes a tremendous difference. Mindset transformation is essential, moving from victim to active participant in recovery. Purpose drives perseverance, finding meaning in helping. Others can sustain long-term commitment. Age is not a barrier. With proper approach, strength can be rebuilt at any age. Perhaps you're wondering why we dedicated so much time to telling Alejandro's story, why we didn't simply present a list of exercises and nutritional recommendations to combat sarcopenia. The answer is simple: because we understand that sarcopenia isn't just a physical condition. It's a complex human experience that affects not only muscles, but also the mind, spirit, relationships, and how we see ourselves. Alejandro's story illustrates something that science is just beginning to understand, that our approach to aging, our beliefs about what's possible as we age, can have a profound impact on our physical experience of the process. When Alejandro changed his narrative, when he stopped seeing himself as a victim of inevitable decline and began considering himself an active agent in his own recovery, he laid the foundation for a transformation that went beyond the purely physiological. And that's the invitation we want to extend to you, to question limiting narratives about aging and sarcopenia, to explore the possibilities that open up when we combine scientific knowledge with a growth mindset, to join a community of people who are redefining what it means to age with strength and dignity. In our upcoming videos, we'll delve into the practical aspects, the specific exercises that can help combat sarcopenia, the nutritional strategies that support muscle health, ways to incorporate movement into your daily life, even if you currently have mobility limitations. But we wanted to start with this story because we understand that before any action plan can be effective, we need to believe that change is possible. Alejandro found that belief in Dr. Ramirez's words, in Lucia's unwavering support, in the community he discovered at the gym, and finally, in his own experience of gradual but significant improvement. His story is a reminder that while we can't control all the circumstances of our aging, we have more agency than we often allow ourselves to recognize. Sarcopenia may be part of your reality, but it doesn't have to define your life experience. There's a path forward, a path that doesn't promise recovered youth, but something equally valuable, an old age lived with strength, purpose, and dignity. If you're ready to explore that path, we're here to accompany you every step of the way, because we believe, as Alejandro came to believe, that it's never too late to reclaim your strength, to challenge limiting expectations, to discover new possibilities in this precious stage of life. Until our next meeting, remember, your body is waiting to respond to the care you give it, and we'll be here offering you the knowledge, support, and inspiration you need to begin or continue your own transformation journey.